Okay, Xavier Ash, or Rubik's 1138, he hails from DC 404 here in Atlanta, Georgia. Xavier is presenting Unlocking Hidden Superpowers, Neurodiversity in InfoSec. Are you ready to embark on a journey that celebrates uniqueness, innovation, and untapped potential? It's time to shine a light on neurodiversity and what that means to information security. The power of neurodiversity. Imagine a world where different brains aren't seen as deficits, but as diverse strengths. Neurodiversity embraces the beautiful mosaic of human minds, from ADD or ADHD to autism and beyond. Xavier will unravel the superpowers hidden within the neurodivergent individuals, like visual hypersensitivity, out-of-the-box thinking, and encyclopedic knowledge. These aren't just buzzwords, they're game changers for the InfoSec field. Brace yourself for success stories that defy convention. JP Morgan Chase's neurodiverse hires outperform their peers by leaps and bounds. Productivity spikes, retention soars, and innovation thrives. Ultra Testing, an IT company with 75% neurodiverse staff, proves that inclusion isn't charity, it's smart. It's smart business, sorry. Their mantra: staffing fantastically capable talent who just haven't had a fair shot before. Xavier won't stop at inspiration. He'll equip you with actionable steps, including how to revisit hiring processes, adapting the environment, tailored career journeys. Be part of the movement. Whether you are a hacker, an individual seeking help, or just a cat lover, yes, there's a slide for that. This presentation is your invitation to change the narrative. So mark your calendars, grab your virtual seat, and let's celebrate neurodiversity one mind at a time. Remember, the rising tide lifts all boats. Join us, learn, and be part of the more inclusive future. Don't miss out on this. Sorry, I can't read this. Don't miss out. This isn't your typical tech talk. It's a revolution waiting to happen. See you there. Now here's his bio. Xavier Ash is currently a senior vice president in Truist Cyber Operations and Technology Divisions, where he is awarded the Truist Performance Award. He is chairman of the board of the Technology Association of Georgia Information Security Society. Xavier is a Georgia Institute of Technology alumnus and has over 30 years of leadership experience in information security, working for various vendors and consulting firms, including IBM, Gartner, and Carbon Black. Xavier was the first hire at startup Drawbridge Networks, where he was instrumental in bringing the first micro segmentation solution for servers and workstations to the market. Mr. Ash has plenty of war stories, including the first DDoS attack ever. Target, Sony, Aramco, wow, that's interesting. And one labeled Redacted, we hope he talks about that, and others. Xavier is an accomplished speaker and has presented at many security conferences, including DEF CON, Black Hat, RSA, B-Side, Splunk, SANS, and others, and as well as CC4. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Xavier Ash, otherwise known as Rubik's 1138. Is he here? I hope he's here. Here he is. Take it away, Rubik's.
All right, great. Sorry, yep. And turn around here. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I realize one thing that is definitely not my superpower is going to be the ability to do UTC math in my head. I really got the times wrong about 3 or 4 times a day, so I'll have to work on that. But I'm here, I'm ready to go, and we are going to dive into this. I'm really excited to be part of this experience. It's really neat, and I'm glad to be part of this. So let's keep going here, moving forward. There we go. So who am I? My name is Xavier Ash. I have been hacking since the late 80s. Got into BBSing and then into the internet, and eventually got a real job and was able to get into information security in the 90s. And I go by Rubik's 1138. Quick story on that one. I was first Rubik's Cubed with a little up caret 3. Once the hackers started getting crazy with hacking into usernames and passwords, a lot of systems stopped using the up caret, so I wasn't able to get Rubik's up caret 3 to get through on that system, so I went with Rubik's 1138. And I do have a big family, a father of 8, and I am very sorry if I do throw out some sarcastic tones here. That's what I was raised with. So, all right, moving on. Neurodiversity. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by kind of explaining what neurodiversity, what I mean by these terms, so that we are all on the same page moving forward. I think this is pretty useful. When I put this together, it really helped me solidify when to use these different terms. So let's dive in. Right, so neurodiversity is both a concept and really a movement. So if you think about neurodiversity as a concept, it really is about the fact that it's the realization that all of our brains operate differently. And that is it is a spectrum. It is a diversity of how our brains work, and it's not necessarily a disease or a defect. It's just a different way that our brains work. And so the movement behind that, by taking that concept and really realizing it, it's more about unleashing the strengths of these neurodivergent people, so that we can understand and get them integrated into society and find a place that really makes them happy. And so that's where my passion's at, is to really kind of help make the world a little bit easier for the neurodivergent folks. So what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is really the collection of terms that means a whole bunch of different stuff. And so some of these, let's address some of them. One of the biggest ones that you'll hear about is ADHD. It's the largest population of neurodivergent folks. Is around 10% of children, and right now it's measured at about 4.4% of adults, and it's probably a whole lot of people can identify with that. It is something where technology is a great place for ADHD folks to be able to find the way to be productive. Autism spectrum disorder is right now at 2.8%, and is that's one in 36, and it's a pretty interesting development as we've moved forward and learning a lot more about autism and autistic people. It's great to see us figure out a better way of integrating them into society. Other neurodiversity that you might have heard of is Tourette's, other learning and disabilities. And so we kind of all bundle these up when we talk about neurodiversity. Here's another way of looking at these terms and making sure that we understand where we're at, right? So if we talk about neurotypical, this is the group of folks that don't have specific situations in which they find themselves in these other categories. And so, but you can see that the autistic versus non-autistic overlaps with neurotypical. And so there is this term that some folks have used, autistic, and really that is a subset of the whole neurodiversity group. Autism, the autistic being in the neurodivergent, and we'll see as we move forward how that all puts together. All right, so here's a little demonstration. Now let's see how well this plays over this VR here. And so if you're actually able to see the animation, it is a perception exercise. And I'm even see. No, can't get that fancy. All right, so if you are perceiving a white dots moving across the field, or black dots moving across a field in opposite direction, then that is one way of perceiving this. And the other way is to see it as a column that is rotating, and what you're actually seeing is one side of a dot versus the other. This is one of the scientific studies. This actually comes from a study, and like I said, all the research in here is linked and available in my presentation. And but basically goes in and demonstrates that the perception of this is one way of having a physical perceivable change in the eye tracting, and being able to show that neurodivergent people do view the world in a different way. And this was one of the demonstrations of seeing that in actual eye movement. All right, moving forward. Hopefully, there we go. All right, so this is another demonstration. Again, this will, see how the technology gods work and see if the stream's over okay. So the concept here is called sensory gating. And sensory gating is the ability to perceive one stream of data amongst a noise, right? It's our ability to focus in on, one thing and not focus in all the others. And this is where neurodivergent people have a larger range here, where some, have to have have to have a very quiet place to be able to focus. Other people, like, for example, me, I always did my studying in college at the local varsity, right? And the noise of everything else allowed me to focus. And so this is also a demonstration. So they're getting into the demonstration. This is called the cocktail party effect, right? So it's when you're at a cocktail party or let's say a DC 404 meeting, right? There's lots of things going on, and can you perceive one conversation over another? So let me go ahead and hit play here and see if this is coming through. And if not, we'll just move on forward.
All right, so today we're going to talk about four things. These are the four critical things to remember. The first is how we make mystery. For me, it's kind of strange because the second thing is perception. The third thing is memory. The fourth thing is knowledge. That's going to change. I'll warn you. So what I did for now, we'll use a real knowledge. So what are the big? And that made it really great because that way I could eat perceptions, memory tricks, and then knowledge for my friends. The big four. Okay.
There we go. So in an example, and you can talk, look at these videos and talk with them, your friends. And when you're talking about neurodiversity, and it really kind of opens up these acknowledgments of our different strengths and weaknesses, and knowing where people stand is really a useful tool to know that you are not alone. Other people have these same situations, and you can recognize that people like that are in your community and work for your company. So that then we can look at making the workplace a better place for everyone, and including those that have different needs when it comes to physical situations like this. Moving forward. Okay. All right. So, getting to the superpowers. This was a fun put together. All of this comes from a collection of different studies and feedback from talking with the Real Autistic Crowd on Twitter and other social media. It's really great. If you are autistic, I have two sons that are autistic, and I might have gifted them. I can touch them as well. But if you can look at these, some of these will jump out at you and say, yes, okay, that makes sense. This is why I'm different. Is that I can do these things. And these are the things that, as your superpowers that you can, focus on and grow. These is something to be proud of and really kind of strengthen. So here's, like I said, some examples of autistic superpowers. Now ADHD superpowers, right? So this is my heart joy together, because I've always thought that this is a particular strength of mine, is my ability to do multiple things. My hyper focus has always gotten me tons of trouble, right? It's the sitting there doing one thing for 20 hours, and but it's one of these, it is a strength. And as a quick aside, let me bring up a situation that comes up very often. They talk about management styles and telling people that they don't overwork, don't burn yourself out. And there is the truth of that. Like, we don't want to overwork our people, and we definitely don't want to burn them out. But there are just types of people that have that hyper focus, and they do work, long hours, and that is just how they drive themselves. It makes them happy. It's what if they didn't complete their task, right, it would just bother them and would not be able to do other stuff until they finish that one thing. And so there's just people out there that need that type of work style. So, sorry, bring back to the conversation here. Just a quick aside about that. These are great features that you need to again strengthen and bring out in yourself. All right, but it's not all candy and fun, right? There is some downsides to our neurodivergency, and so let's talk about that, right? So sensory overload is one of the most common. Now, sensory overload is a situation in which the talking again about that perception gating or sensory gating is not being able to filter out the noise around you to focus on the task at hand. And sometimes the variety of sensory is so much that it is hard to function. And so this is a demonstration that goes through that. This is, I do want to have a kind of a content warning on this one. It is a demonstration of sensory overload. If you are prone to having sensory overload, this might be slightly triggering. Maybe turn down your audio, or if you have headphones on. I just don't want this to bother other folks, because when I first found this video, it turned my stomach. Just knowing that feeling is definitely true. So let's go through and take a look at this. And as a good example, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, hopefully this will be.
Just wait there 1 minute. I'm just going to get a ticket, okay? Alex, just breathe. That's it, just deep breathing, calming down. Okay. See, everything's fine now? Yeah? Right. Let's go home.
I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
Always have to take a breath of that. So, this is, the downside of having these sensory imbalances is while it allows us to do some amazing things, there is the sensory overload is real, and it's a very physical reaction to that. And so that leads us to finding these situations and looking at what's it going to do to help us unlock our superpowers, right? So here's some other examples of some of these challenges beyond just the sensory. Is that if we think about social interactions, the folks on the spectrum and really a lot of neurodivergent folks have different challenges when it comes to social interactions. Misinterpreting social cues, not understanding and really taking that there's a nonverbal communication is a real challenge. And so that's where remote work and VR and being able to interact with people in a different modality is very welcoming to a large amount of neurodivergent folks. Sensory overload, we talked about those, but it doesn't just deal with bright sounds and loud noises, smells, sometimes just textures, tastes. It's different for different folks, and this also goes with information overload, right? Some people, if needing to have organizational, being able to take everything in and process it, when folks have that processing disorder, that really gets frustrating and can really challenge folks. Executive challenges, being able to do time management. As I laugh at myself and not being able to be focused on or get the right time here in the VR, I'm showing my weaknesses. So sticking to routines. This is an interesting one. I'm one of those. This is one of my weaknesses as well because time management is something I have to really work hard at. It was something that did not come natural to me, and I feel like as physically handicapped people use different devices, I've had to use technology and lots of rigor to be able to function in society that's very time based. So it's one of those to kind of call out that people have those weaknesses and figuring out how we can strengthen those with the new tools that we're developing. Mental health issues, anxiety and depression is a big deal in neurodivergency, and understanding that kind of comorbidity with a lot of our diagnoses is taking all that in, and I also put anxiety and depression in the superpowers. That's one thing I forgot to call out when we were looking over the superpowers. But just as a call out here is that depressing people that have dealt with depression a good bit in their life see the world in a different way than people who have not. And that perspective is a divergent or a diverse perspective that is needed in technology fields, right? When I'm putting together a project plan, it is really easy to sit there and say, yes, I think this is all going to work. And you go to implement the plan and all of your estimates are off, right? You didn't think of all the bad things that could happen. People that deal with anxiety and depression often do, right? They have a lot more of a cautious nature because they know that they've dealt with triggers all their lives. So this is both a weakness and a strength that I wanted to call out. And the additional challenges of our lack of accommodations. It is wonderful to see so many neurodivergent people finding enough happiness and support to get through life and get into the workforce. And this is really what we're seeing. This is part of this movement is that, previously, we did a whole lot of things that now we know is not a very useful way to treat or deal with autistic people. And that would those people that were harmed by that, helping us learn the way to be able to give everyone a path to being well integrated in a society, and InfoSec needs to pull those folks in. It's a place where all of our strengths really shine, and is also a place in which we have a lot of technology to help accommodate us. And so InfoSec is just a great place to make sure that they're very that we're welcoming and give them a place to call home. All right, so why hire us? Well, now we get into the it's not just Xavier saying that we're awesome, right? It is also a provable fact, right? So here are some bits of data that will help you if you would like to take this on in your environment, in your school or workplace of work, and be able to talk to HR or other teams that can help support being able to get a better accommodation for your company, or if it's just a personal accommodation and you'd like to make some changes for your personal experience. Hopefully, these different studies here and will help with that. So starting off, this is the greatest quote that you can come away with is that that the Harvard Business Review put together a program that pull in neurodivergent specific recruiting and brought those folks in to do in this case was a QA team that came in and were 30% more productive than others. I mean, that was a great headline as a takeaway. Other examples. JP Morgan and Chase, when they went on and built a program, they were able to prove that that their overall was up to 140% more productive than employees that had been in the company. Not just just slightly more productive, but over 100% more productive. And so they saw that success and have published their research. There's a support group called Neurodiversity in the Workplace, and their programs show that a 94% retention rate. So from a hiring perspective, right, that is a huge plus. It costs a lot of money to refill a role, and so the retention rate for neurodivergent hires is if you've got a wonderful, accommodating workplace, that you're going to find that most neurodivergent folks would love to stay around and work for your company for quite a while. And then Ultra Testing is a company that hired nearly all of their staff are autistics, and they are just having a great time. There's so that company is called Ultra Testing. If you want to look them up, there's a really great use cases and shows that it's not just we need not just a sprinkling of neurodiversity, but if you go all in, some really great things can happen. All right, so if you are in those positions where you are hiring, you are a leader, you're up there at the forefront of being able to make changes in the workplace. Here are some tips for you to take back to your HR team and talk about how we can make our company more attractive to neurodiverse talent. Right. So first, I was looking at the hiring process. Right. How you get get those folks in your funnel to begin with. You're looking at that. Are you only looking at specific schools? Then you're realizing that a lot of neurodivergent folks do not come up through traditional secondary schools. So looking at your hiring and criteria process, right, is the excuse me, sorry, I lost my spot on my notes here. So yeah, rethinking the screening criteria to make sure that that we're not screening them out before we get in. For example, just the application process, and sometimes we'll screen out folks because the challenge with getting into applying for a job. So Looking at those, look at your interview process, making sure that it is not is not overly stressful for neurodivergent folks, right? Things like panel interviews, right, where you get into a room and 4 people are staring at you, and high pressure, that is not going to bring out the best in a lot of neurodivergent folks. So just look for examples of those type of harsh interview tactics, and then expand the different roles that are available. Looking at and thinking of different ways of solving problems and making sure we've got roles out there for everyone. So create a conductive work environment, right? Respect individual differences in communication and work styles. Provide mentors and support systems. Offer flexible work arrangements. These are examples that can make sure that you are really making a home for folks. Finally, we've got looking at once you've hired them, now how are you going to make sure that they're going to be productive and happy and want to stick around? Is making sure that they that you've enabled your managers to know how to accommodate these people. It means looking at work at home arrangements, looking at different office seating arrangements, and so understanding that and being able to be that flexible will make your and make everyone happier and more productive in your workplace. All right, here is some other tools. This is from a great program I found from the Center of Applied Autism Research in the UK, and it basically is a way of measuring your environment and looking at the basically giving yourself a score, so that you can then make some changes and help improve your ability to have a adaptive environment. And so looking at this, starting off at adapting, looking at the environment specifically, the sensory environment, right? Does everyone have a place to work where they feel comfortable? Ambient smells and visuals, right? Lighting, the room layout, open versus closed offices. So that's the first measure, right? A timely environment, right? Has appropriate time been given to all the tasks, right? Being able to make sure that you can communicate and be flexible on timescales, and then making sure that there's procedural stuff is written out and expectations are really out there. Explicit environment, right? Everything is everything very explicit in the expectations. There are folks that are neurodivergent that really don't have the flexibility, or I should say that it creates stress when things are not rigid and well understood. And so that is a way of helping those people, is making sure that you've got a very clear and explicit environment, and predictable. So predictability is that I know what to expect, and when things happen, understanding that some people are going to react differently to those changes. So, for example, when COVID hit and we had to switch to work from home, there were people that were able to make that adjustment very easily, others that were not. Right? That's an example that's kind of very large, but that this really looks at more of the more subtle changes in the work environments that still might interrupt people's day to day. If they expect to have food available or coffee and those type of things on a schedule, sometimes that predictability is really soothing. So, like I said, if you're in the workplace and you need to be able to, kind of give yourself a way of scoring yourself and over time, so that you can implement some procedures and show that this is a great program to reach out to. All right. And then, so here's a couple of resources to take away. If you like I said, if you're a leader and you want to get in and help, here are some different programs and communities that you can reach out to. You can, like I said, I'll make sure that these slides are available. And also we have but I did want to talk specifically about the Neurodiversity Hub. This is one of the places where, I got a lot of specific toolkits and brochures and to take to my HR, and we're talking through and being able to implement some of these things. So very usable resources, and it's really good to kind of have that, in a way that's easily consumable. But what if you're an individual and you need some help navigating this world? So there are a lot of great different programs out there. So first off is I've got a collection of different job boards. Now some of these are like the more traditional job boards where it's just I'm going to go out and find neurodivergent jobs and pull them in. Others work with companies to develop specific neurodivergent programs. And so, it's a lot more targeted, and so if you are on the spectrum or you've got extreme ADHD or something that you're looking for companies that have specific accommodations, some of these job boards will definitely be your ticket there. And then if you are in the workforce and you're looking for support, there's a couple different support groups out there. First off, each state has a state vocational rehab. So if you search for your state, vocational rehab, then you can find those websites that will allow you to see what resources are available in your specific state. And this is a great place to find all the local programs, local community programs, so that you could possibly find people that can help, that really know your community, and able to find jobs or help you navigate an employee situation. Other organizations out there, the ARC, Association for Autism and Neurodiversity, and the Society for Neurodiversity, are all different specific organizations to help companies and individuals with understanding how to be, most accommodating in the workforce. So, great resources out there, and I really appreciate being a part of this community and being able to present to you guys. Put my information up there if you want to follow me. I didn't go off on Twitter earlier. I'll be nice today, but I'm on Mastodon if you'd like to find me, and I'm still on LinkedIn. That's about it for social media. All right. I guess we're going to have time. I think we've got some time for some questions.
Yes, you have time for questions. Oh, sorry, my bullhorn was on. Yes, you have time for questions. You're standing outside the audio zone. You won't be.
Hey, back here.
This is Giglio. For the one that was the column that was rotating. Which is the right or which
outside the audio zone? Can't hear you.
Yeah, I can hear.
Oh,
yeah. So it's there is no right answer, right? It's that, and that's the point. Is that it is the way that we perceive the world is our own. So if I say that is it's a cone, or it's two sheets of or a column, or it's the same thing. There's another proverb about the elephant, blind people and the elephant, right? Touching different parts of the elephant, describing it in different ways. and trying to convince the other that they're right. But the point is they're all right, and that's the same with that demonstration.
Cool. Thanks.
Hmm?
How do virtual environments help?
Yeah, I would like to, when I was putting together this and trying to, shape it for this one, I was looking for specific studies or any type of discussion around there. And I really couldn't find too much, but more a lot of like hopeful thinking, right? That the idea is that we're creating another way to communicate, and maybe that will unlock, a communication path for people that might have not found that comfort zone yet. So it's but that really hasn't been too many studies on it yet.
We have any more questions for our speakers?
I was curious what types of technology education are available with neurodivergence in mind.
So I gotta head back one. So yeah, these support groups here all have different resources, as do these particular organizations here. And so this one particular, we're talking about training, Optimize. That's their product that they sell, right? So they productize that, but also have the community that they've built it around. And so I would check out Optimize. And X-Ray, what is the best way to provide slides, and make sure that whoever would like to get these?
Well, if you send them to me as a PDF, I can post them on the wall over here to the right.
Okay, will do.
I couldn't think of a question, but just want to say, as someone who's not neurodivergent, I hear myself twice as I speak. I find it very enlightening. Like it's a point of view I haven't seen before, and then seeing like my environment. So thank you for that.
I appreciate the feedback. Yeah, it's something once you really kind of have the realization of kind of knowing that this situation exists and really starting to identify that in society, and openly talking about it and being able to see how many people that you know that really would fit into that neurodivergent crowd. It's going to be surprising. We're a lot more of us are identify as neurodivergent than you would think.
Actually, I really connected with the part you said about depression because you pointed out like how they see the different point of view. I always saw myself as simply a realist. Like not all people are good. Nothing ever goes exactly to plan, and I always pointed it out. And hearing you speak about it from that angle just made me think about myself a bit.
Wonderful. I'm glad I could help. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.